A group of people were then surprised when they saw the forest in front of them suddenly crushed by a burning fire. The group of people looked like an adventure. When they saw that, they then asked if there were any kobolds that would survive. The incident was caused by a mage who had entered the forest first. Their captain had guessed that the mage was quite strong. They then asked if they should retreat at least for now. The captain then yelled at them after hearing that. He told them not to be cowards. From the size of the fire, he guessed the mage must not have recovered his mana. But right after the captain said that, they were then surprised when they saw a figure coming out of the forest. The figure came out while carrying a monster head. He complained about the weight of the head, which was really heavy. He was a man with black hair, also the mage they were talking about before. He was a little confused when he saw a group of adventurers in front of him suddenly mounted an attack horse. They then told him to stop. He just chuckled at that. They warned him not to think about doing anything and told him to put down the head he was carrying. If he did, they promised to let him live. With a frivolous smile, he then pretended to agree to that, and when he had put the monster's head on the ground, he then suddenly cast a magic. They were surprised at how quickly he cast a magic. The captain then told his partner who had been hiding in the bush to shoot a bow, and the partner who heard it then immediately shot a bow towards him. The trajectory of the bow was at his blind spot, which would make it difficult for him to avoid it, but he was not worried about that at all. With the flow of mana that was now enveloping his whole body, it then made the trajectory of the bow turn and hit the adventurer instead. The adventurer then screamed in pain when the bow suddenly hit his leg. They were then surprised to see that. The captain then told them to stop dumbfounded and kill him. They then immediately rushed to attack the mage simultaneously, but the mage's gaze was very calm when he saw it. He then stepped back to open the distance with them, then put his palms together, which caused the mana flow that was churning around. Seeing that, the captain realized that he was casting ice magic, but he was surprised at how quickly he did it, and when he was struggling with his thoughts, he was then surprised by his partner who suddenly froze right in front of him. The partner then fell right next to the mage, which then made his body shattered into pieces. The captain could only curse seeing that. He was already feeling panicked at this time, but he was also confused. Wasn't he a fire mage? He wondered if the fire was caused by an explosion instead of magic. But he was then surprised when the mage suddenly asked if the two of them were hiding in the bush. He then cast a fire magic that made a fireball come out of his hand and several fireballs floating around him. He then flew the fireballs towards the adventurers who had been hiding in the bush. The adventurers were desperate when they saw his attack approaching them and immediately asked for his forgiveness. The captain and his bald-headed partner could only stand still seeing this because they were so shocked. Seeing the mage approaching him, the bald-headed man then frantically asked him not to come closer, but the mage didn't care about that at all. He then pressed the bald man's head and burned him. The captain could only stare in shock at the incident. The captain's amazement could not be explained by words. He was very confused why he could use the fire and ice attributes at the same time. He had never seen a mage like that before. While picking up his sword, the mage just casually replied, "What do you think?" While brandishing his sword, he then said, "It's because I'm a trash character," and the captain's life ended right then and there. The mage then put the monster's head on the table of a shop in the village. The pub owner was quite surprised to see that, and the people in the pub then simultaneously looked in their direction. Seeing the monster head on the table, the pub owner felt that this was very surprising. He had really wiped out the kobold nest. He didn't even expect anything. He then thanked him, but before the pub owner could even finish his words properly, the mage suddenly stuck his sword into his table to investigate. Seeing the sword, the pub owner immediately realized that the mage had met with the vigilantes. He also looked a little anxious at this time. The mage confirmed it. They were doing useless things, so he buried them all before coming here. With a threatening look he then asked, "Is there anyone here who needs to be buried too?" The pub owner then calmed him down. He assured him, "They wouldn't even think of it. Those bastards don't do anything, but they keep filling their stomachs with alcohol and meat, don't they?" A man in the pub also replied, "They only call themselves vigilantes, but they are no different from thieves." They then agreed with the man's words. They felt that the vigilantes were just a group of bastards. They also said, if he didn't do it, they would do it, and slaughtered the group of bastards. He just sighed hearing this. He then reread the sub-quest information he was doing. The quest required him to wipe out the kobold nest and defeat the kobold chieftain. He had successfully completed all the requirements and had automatically completed the quest, but even so, he didn't look very happy because as usual, the reward was not good. He then asked the pub owner about the reward for the commission to clean the kobold nest. The pub owner then replied, as promised, he could stay at his pub for free for life. The pub owner then asked if he needed anything else. The mage replied no, and only told him to prepare hot water for bathing now. Hearing that, the tavern owner then said he would prepare it immediately, seeing him about to walk upstairs. The tavern owner then asked, what was his name? The mage replied, Ian Hoff. Aquilonia, it was a game he illegally downloaded from the community. A semi-open world of dark fantasy full of betrayal and conspiracy. At this time, the body he occupied, Ian Hoff, was the character he grew up with before transmigrating to this world, a messed up mage character. At first, Aquilonia is a game where players can only make one path, therefore, players will be able to handle the difficulty level of the latter half of the game, but that case does not apply to him. If he needs stamina, he chooses stamina. If he wants to use a sword, he chooses swordsmanship. There is nothing he can do. Mages are supposed to hunt alone. So he decided to delete his game character. After realizing his character had been destroyed, he tried to delete it, and started to raise a new character, but the last thing he saw was a strange messages. Along with the strange messages, his monitor screen suddenly flickered, and when he opened his eyes, he was in a swamp full of various enemies and monsters, a place called the tutorial area. He was very scared when he first arrived there. He also confusedly wondered what he had done wrong to make him fall into a place like this. He didn't think about irrational situations like this for too long, because he could die with a small mistake. In the early stages he suffered a lot to try to survive, until half a year later he was in the swamp. He had slowly adjusted to this dark world, and now a year had passed. When he felt someone coming, he then took his sword that was next to his bathtub, and swung his sword at the person. The person couldn't even react and the sword was about to cut off his head, but fortunately Ian immediately stopped his sword swing when he found out that the person was just a maid. The maid then screamed in fear when she saw his sword that almost reached her neck. She stutteringly said that she only brought water. Ian then apologized for that. He thought she was an intruder. The maid then poured the water into his bathtub. She also asked him to tell her if the water was too hot, but the maid then became unfocused when she saw his athletic body. Ian realized that and told her to stop thinking that no. The maid then blushed when she was caught peeping at him. The reason why he could survive in the tutorial area was thanks to the original stat of his character. Without it, he would have died from the beginning. Even so, the point still serves, that Ia Hoff is still a doomed character. Because of his transmigration, the map of this world has expanded and the enemy has become stronger. Now, even people and villages that he had never seen before appeared. Now there is still no problem because the gap between his stat and the bastards from this country is still very large. But if he continues to be complacent like this, he will definitely be swept away in what is about to happen and die, so he must become stronger, even if it is just a little bit. He also hopes that something useful will emerge from the kobold nest. He is also thinking of ordering those stupid villagers to search. In a dead forest, there was a group of people with many corpses lying around them. While putting things into a chest, one of the people then asked if it was really okay if they took all this. His friend then convinced him. Master Ian said they just needed to give something that looked valuable. They were seen scrambling for the items they could take. Ian himself didn't know if they were doing as he ordered or not. A man then reported to him. They had stripped the armor from these monsters as he ordered. Seeing the bead on the monster's chest, Ian was happy because he finally found what he was looking for. He then pulled out his sword and pried the bead from the monster's chest using his sword. Seeing the bead, the pub owner then asked, "Is it a cursed bead?" Ian confirmed it. It contains mana that has been tainted in large quantities. Hearing that, the pub owner then asked, "Does his mean the chief uses black magic or something?" Ian wasn't sure about that, but he was sure that the person who planted it in this body must have used it. The pub owner then asked again, "What happens if someone is bewitched by it?" And in a hut nearby, a man was seen holding a stone that was exactly like the one Ian got. A friend of his then came and asked him if he had searched everything there. The friend also saw the stone he was holding. He then asked what it was. It looked beautiful. Did he pick it up? The man said yes, he picked it up from there. He also said he would take this and give it to his mother. After hearing the question from the pub owner, Ian then replied, "You will become a doll if you are enchanted by this thing, and become a new toy for the bastards who implanted this thing in their bodies." In a small house nearby, Ian could be seen looking at his loot. These were all items from the kobold chieftain's hut. He was quite satisfied with it. Besides that, he also got a more important loot, the corrupted high-tier mana essence, which he got from killing the kobold chieftain. He could use this well after cleaning it. And he also put it back in his dimension pouch in his shirt pocket. He regretted that his dimension pouch was small, even so he didn't really mind it, because it was still useful. When he moved to this place, he still had Ian Hoff's level and skills, but the environment here changed back to the game starting point. Game progression, quests, items, everything. He was also confused why his levels and skills didn't reset. Was this some kind of mercy so that he wouldn't die easily? He also guessed that maybe this was a gift from the figure who brought him to this world. He decided not to think too much about it, after all it benefited him, but he still hoped that they would give him some points. After finding an axe, the pub owner then asked if he could have this. Ian didn't mind that, but not for free. The pub owner then asked what he meant. Ian just said they would talk about this later, and took him to the entrance. He wanted to see how well they completed his request. Ian then gathered all the villagers he hired. He wanted to do a check on what items they had taken. This was not a search that needed effort, but he decided to check it himself. And he then activated vision, mana detection. After checking several people, he did not see any irregularities from several people, until finally when he set his eyes on a man, he saw a green tinge of aura coming out from inside the man's pocket. Ian could only lament the stupidity of the man. The man was then confused by it. Ian then pointed his sword at the man's neck while giving him a threatening look. He told him to show the contents of his pocket. The man then broke out in a cold sweat while still feeling confused, but then, his eyes suddenly turned red. Ian also realized it. And a very evil aura then enveloped his whole body. They were then confused about what happened to the man. The man's movements suddenly became stiff like a doll. Ian, who saw that, realized that it was a curse. He just felt that from the beginning their thoughts were different. He then tried to cut off the man's head, but surprisingly, his slash could be easily blocked by the man. The man then smiled sadistically and asked him not to immediately cut his neck like that. Ian felt this was a problem. He originally thought it was just a curse, but it turned out to be something else. The man then cursed Ian for messing up the seeds he had planted in his field. He also knew that Ian had also hidden the seed. Hearing that, Ian then asked if he was talking about the corrupted essence bead. He felt that he must be confused because he lost the connection when he saved it to his dimensional bag. If it weren't for him, he was sure that the kobolds would have attacked the village. He felt that he was an external variable that was not taken into account by him. Realizing that, Ian just smiled sarcastically and said, "Looks like you are in a hurry. I will use your mana well." Dark Mage. The Dark Mage was then very angry at his arrogant attitude. He then broke his sword with one grip. Ian was annoyed by that, even though he had not long got this sword. Not waiting for him to prepare, the Dark Mage then immediately accelerated towards him, and when the Dark Mage launched his attack, fortunately Ian was still able to easily block the attack, but the attack did not stop there. The Dark Mage then sent his attack continuously, which succeeded in overwhelming Ian. The Dark Mage laughed happily when he saw him overwhelmed in blocking his attack. He then said he would teach him how to talk well, but before he could even continue his words, he was then surprised when he saw a fireball about to hit him, until finally the fireball erupted, which caused a very powerful impact. The fireball certainly came from Ian. He seemed to have begun to be serious at this time, but the attack was still not enough to subvert the Dark Mage. He still felt confused at this time, but before he could even ask a question, Ian suddenly launched another attack, and burned him using fireballs. The residents were confused and shocked to see that Ian's attack did not stop there. He then once again sent a fireball to burn him, which successfully burned the Dark Mage's skin. The Dark Mage at that moment realized that Ian was a person from Crimson. He felt it was even better and promised to look for him again. He also threatened to tear his soul apart, but before he could even utter the threatening words properly, Ian had already beheaded him, right at the end of his life. The Dark Mage then said, "Necromancer." That was the name of the Dark Mage. Hearing that, Ian just said, "You don't need to introduce yourself when fighting," and he then picked up the bead on the body occupied by the Dark Mage. This bead was smaller than the chief's bead. It also made him sure that there was indeed another bead left by the Dark Mage. Realizing that, under the gaze of all the villagers, Ian then brandished his sword and asked, "Did anyone else get it?" After the incident, at a pub in the village, the pub owner was then surprised when he saw Ian visiting his bar early this morning. He was surprised because Ian again managed to complete the task quite quickly. He found it hard to believe that he was a mage. Ian just snorted coldly at that and told him to be careful with his words. The pub owner just laughed and told him not to worry. In his view, Ian looked different from those scary mages. Their reputation was bad, so he understood why he hid the matter at the beginning. Ian then got annoyed when the bar owner still continued to discuss it. He then threatened if he wanted to burn his mouth with a fireball. The bar owner panicked a little at that and replied no, he was actually worried about him. He felt that the dark mage would definitely not let the incident pass. Hearing that, Ian just told him to worry about himself, because he could die because of him. He had completed every task from the pub and every sub-quest in the village, but the problem was that he only got a small amount of EXP. He also felt that it was time for him to leave here. On a cliff near the village, two people who were riding horses were looking at the village where Ian was. After asking something to a villager, a man who was behind then confirmed the words of his friend who was wearing full armor earlier, the person who destroyed the kobold's nest. He was in this village. For whatever reason they were looking for someone who destroyed the kobold's nest, but certainly, Ian seemed unable to leave the village immediately. Somewhere with a lot of blood splat on the floor, there was a bloody battle that killed many people. There was a person wearing a full suit of armor being surrounded by a group of soldiers, but even so he was able to overthrow many of them. He was Mo Laurel, the bleeding avenger. Mo Laurel was originally a knight of Agellan, but, because he was blinded by revenge, he ended up becoming Aquilonia's first chapter mid-boss. He didn't know the exact reason, but if he's not mistaken, he then ran to the Imperial Palace alone to kill King Agellan, and more importantly, even when he was on the verge of death, all his attacks were still fatal, even though as the first chapter mid-boss, he was almost impossible to defeat. So when Mauve and one of his companions visited him in the pub and asked if he was someone who eradicated the entire kobold nest single-handedly, he could only swear. Since it wasn't time for them to meet, Ian was silent for a moment at his question. He then pointed towards the kobold chieftain's head that was displayed on the wall. He was quite surprised to see that. He then praised him. Even the elite soldiers of the border army were afraid to challenge them, but he could do it alone. Before that he wanted to apologize first for asking this kind of question suddenly. They need to confirm if he is the man they are looking for. He then introduced Mauve to him, a follower of the Ruse Solar and apostle of Tyron, the enforcer of the southern border and the precious sword of Agellan, Knight Mauve Laurel. Ian could only curse hearing that, because this was far from what he expected. His appearance was also very different from the Mauve he knew. He felt that it seemed that he had not been blinded by revenge. After introducing Mauve, he then introduced himself. His name is Philip. He is serving Mauve. He represented Mauve to greet him. Ian then introduced himself, and as they saw, he was a mercenary. He also asked why they were here. Philip didn't answer right away and asked again, did he see anything strange in the kobold's lair? Ian was then confused to hear that. Philip then said, for example, a trace of black magic or something unholy. Ian knew what he meant, but he didn't expect to experience unexpected events once again. He met Mauve who hadn't fallen yet, and they were looking for the dark mage too, so he thought of trying to test them. He then said that he wasn't really sure, although if anything, he was a mercenary, so he wouldn't help for free, unless there was an agreement. As much as possible, he wanted the knight to make a deal directly with him. Philip was then annoyed by his attitude and was about to disagree with it, but Mauve immediately stopped him. He said that Ian was not wrong. But Ian was surprised when he heard his voice. Mauve then apologized for Philip's impudence, and he then took off his helmet. Surprisingly, Mauve turned out to be a woman. Philip was also surprised and hesitated when he saw her suddenly take off her helmet. Mauve only said that she tended to speak little in front of people she had just met. That's why Philip spoke on her behalf. She had no other intentions. While Ian himself still felt surprised by the fact that Mauve turned out to be a woman, he didn't remember, because he never heard Mauve's voice properly. The only thing he remembered was her last breath and whisper, and, in the midst of struggling with his thoughts, Mauve then invited him to continue the deal. They will pay for his information. She then told Philip to take out a gold coin from the pocket, and she handed the gold coin to Ian. Seeing that, Ian realized that the gold coin was the imperial gold coin that had the highest value. Mauve said she hoped it made him understand how urgent this matter was. Ian indirectly agreed and said, "There is someone who deliberately raised the kobolds. The kobold chieftain consumed the dirty mana arranged by that person and grew stronger. He also found that the kobold chieftain had an essence bead containing dirty mana embedded in its chest. He then took out the bead that he got from killing the kobold chieftain. They looked surprised when they saw that." Ian continued, "He said because he took it, his plan was messed up, so he said he would find him and kill him no matter what." Hearing that, Mauve suddenly got a bad feeling about this. What Vernon had previously said turned out to be true. A seed of darkness was really growing in the kingdom. Since they had confirmed his identity, Mauve felt it was time to track him down. She then threw a pouch containing 10 imperial gold coins to him as a form of payment. She wanted to use this instead of the bead he was holding. Ian happily agreed to it. Before leaving, Mauve said there was one more thing she wanted him to do. Ian was then confused to hear that, if he don't mind, she wants him to accompany her to the palace. As the only witness, a sub-quest suddenly triggered right after Mauve said that. The sub-quest told him to accompany Mauve and kill the black mage. With a reward of 1 skill point, Ian was then surprised to see that this was a sub-quest that he had never triggered before, and the reward was skill points, so he decided not to miss this quest. But he did not directly agree to Mauve's request. He wanted to take advantage of this to obtain the greatest benefit for him, so with a faint smile he said, "As I said, I am a mercenary. We should make a deal if you want me to join." Philip then scolded his greed. He had already received quite a lot, but he was still talking about money. But Ian did not care at all about his words and continued. "And most importantly, if he recruited him, he would help her find the dark mage too." Hearing that, Mauve then asked, "Does he mean he knows his hiding place?" Ian replied no, but he can find him. That's how he makes a living. He lied, but he already had a guess. He continued, "The dark mage hates him, so there should be an additional fee if she wants the person he targeted to join." Mauve pondered for a moment. She then agreed to it. She wanted to recruit him, Ian Hoff, and she would guarantee this deal with her name, Mo Laurel. After they both agreed, Ian then came with them on a horse. Before leaving, Mauve then asked, was he sure the black mage was where they were going? Ian replied yes. His hiding place is most likely the Forest of Graves. The Forest of Graves is also referred to as a forest that only has an entrance and no exit. The pub owner was also surprised when he heard they were going to the Forest of Graves. He then asked what they were looking for in that place. But Ian did not want to tell him directly and told him to continue to explain. The pub owner then continued, it was a forest built by the ancient fairies on top of a graveyard. Originally, it was used to bury soldiers, but, over time, even the bodies of ordinary people were buried there. Over time, the mist in the forest began to solidify, and the people who went there never returned. Hearing that, Ian thought that the information was exactly the same as in the game, so he decided they should head there immediately. But Mauve still doubted even though Ian said so, because the forest was in the middle of the kingdom. Did he really think the black mage would be in such a place? Hearing her doubts, Ian then reassured her, as she already knew, the black mage had been planting seeds in different places and waiting for the harvest day, so he was sure he must be in a place where people did not usually go to avoid getting into trouble. So wouldn't it be better if he planned something in such an unexpected place? In the middle of the kingdom is the perfect location for him. Ian then said he would tell her more on the way and invited her to sleep in this place for now. Mauve also agreed because it was getting late. Philip then invited them to go further into the forest. Not far from where they were there would be a river where tourists spend the night, but Ian did not agree to that. In the middle of the forest there were wolves. He did not want his sleep disturbed. Philip seemed to have just found out about it. Therefore, he then took the initiative to find wood to light the fireplace. In Ian's view, Philip was really an inexperienced person. He said like that it was the same as announcing it to the whole forest. A cold chill suddenly enveloped them, and a figure silently stalked them behind the bushes behind them. It turned out that there was already a wolf pack that had been lurking and trying to prey on them. The wolf pack was led by a large humanoid wolf like a werewolf who stood behind them all. After Philip returned from looking for wood, they then made a fireplace while boiling water. But Ian still felt strange. When observing her, he could not see any reason why she would flood the palace with blood and kill the king. Even so, he thought Mauve must have her own reasons, just like a typical villain. Ian then took out a bag. Philip suddenly felt happy when he saw him about to open the bag. Ian could only feel confused to see it. At that time, just as they were about to leave the pub, they were suddenly stopped briefly by the maid who poured water while Ian was bathing. The maid then gave him a bag containing meat and cheese, and asked him to be careful on the road. Philip's face then turned red when recalling the incident. He seemed to be overwhelmed by the current romantic turmoil, seeing his anticipation. Ian then asked, didn't he say he only wanted to eat rice? Hearing that, Philip then asked if he planned to share his food. Ian did not object to that as long as he remained silent. In the midst of the night breeze that hit them, Ian suddenly closed the bag he was about to open. Philip was then confused to see that and asked, did he just want to bully him? But Ian immediately told him to shut his mouth. He then put the bag back into his dimension bag. Philip was really confused by their sudden change of attitude. Mauve then put her helmet back on. She realized that it seemed like they had uninvited guests. They then both looked in a certain direction. Philip finally understood why they suddenly became like that. He was also surprised when he saw so many pairs of eyes stalking them. He wondered if they were all wolves. He was also confused about what they should do now. Ian could only swear after learning that they were being ambushed by a pack of wolves. He felt like they should skip dinner. The wolves growled and slowly walked towards them. Judging from their size, they were just ordinary wolves. Mauve asked if he thought they had anything to do with the black mage. Ian was not sure about that. They would find out after killing them all. Mauve also felt that he was right. She then ordered Philip to retreat and guard the horses. Philip understood. She also told Ian to help Philip guard the horses. She seemed to intend to fight the wolves alone, but Ian refused to do so, and instead told her to guard the horses. Mauve was then confused to hear that. Ian said she couldn't chase these wolves with clothes like that. Even so, Mauve still felt doubtful. But before she could even say anything further, Philip suddenly called her and said that the wolves were also coming from his direction too. Ian told her not to worry about him. There were some things he could only do when he was alone. Anyway, she would not lose anything. Mauve was silent for a moment amidst Philip's panic. She then asked him not to die and immediately rushed towards Philip. Ian was even annoyed at her words. She should worry about himself. And as the wolves slowly walked towards him, he was surprised by how many wolves there were, and a wolf then pounced towards him. But it could still be dodged quite easily by him. But Ian felt annoyed. He could have finished them all off using fire magic, but he couldn't just take out his card, because he didn't know when they would become his enemy, although it was a bit difficult, but he decided to keep his card hidden. So, he then used the gray spell Wind Sword Blade. It can increase the speed of movement when catching the wind, and when he wants, he can also turn it into a sharp sword. His slash became very sharp after using the spell, which was strong enough to cut the body of a wolf using one slash. But a big wolf suddenly sneaked attack towards him, and was about to eat him, but the wolf was surprised when he saw Ian suddenly escape from his bite. Ian used Gray's wind barrier spell to escape. Ian just mocked the wolf, then prepared his attack. He then attacked the wolf, which made it blood splatter everywhere. Not only him, Mauve and Philip were also currently fighting in the middle of the wolf siege. They were better than he imagined. Even Philip fought quite well there, but he felt annoyed, because their fight had been too long. He knew it would be bad if it continued like this, because this was how it hunted. They must find it soon. Ian then activated mana detection in order to find the leader of this wolf pack. After he spread his mana far enough, he finally found it. It turned out to have been lurking behind them all this time. Ian then called Mauve and told her to protect the horses here. He was going to go face the leader of the wolves. Mauve was quite confused to hear that, but before she had time to ask, Ian had already left. He immediately jumped over the wolves just like that. He then stepped on the air and immediately accelerated past the wolves. Mauve was shocked to see that, and the wolves who saw him pass them easily did not remain silent and immediately rushed after him. Mauve was shocked when she saw that he could jump in the air. She even wondered if she was hallucinating, but her reverie was soon interrupted by Philip's screams. She then saw Philip, who was crying in fear because he was about to be eaten by wolves. She then immediately came to save him, but what she didn't know was, there was a mysterious figure speeding behind him, and Ian immediately chased the figure. He was quite surprised because the werewolf still had the instincts of a wild beast, and he then landed right in front of it. They are now facing each other. The werewolf looks angry when it sees a human who dares to stop it, but Ian just mocked it when he saw the wolves who were chasing him had arrived and prepared to surround him. But he did not feel panic at all. He had been waiting for something like this. He then took out his sword from its sheath, and a sub-quest was triggered, the cursed Andolf. The quest told him to kill the cursed werewolf, Andolf. Ian smiled happily at that. From now on it would be his prey. The werewolf looked very annoyed at his attitude. He then ordered the wolves to attack him, but Ian didn't look panicked at all. He then used the wind sword blade to finish them all off. It made his sword covered in blood, without the crocs in the way. Now only the two of them were left facing each other. Ian then said, "You look even more disgusting than from the game, Andolf." Andolf looked annoyed at his taunts, but Ian taunted it again. Was it now afraid because it was alone? Hearing that, Andolf then angrily rushed to attack him. It then condensed the aura in its claws and used it to attack him. Seeing it attack, Ian then used wind barrier to block it, but that still didn't seem to be enough. Ian also realized that. He then condensed the mana frost in his hand and used it to form a frost shield. It was successful in blocking the attack of Andolf's claws. Andolf didn't seem to think he could block it attack. Ian then put on a mocking grin to it, and Andolf was then surprised when the frost shield in his hand suddenly broke apart and flew towards it. It did not expect it at all, and could only hold it using its body. It then took the initiative to step back to open the distance. Andolf's skin is now covered in blood due to his attack. Seeing that, Ian then asked, "Did you like it? Did you want more?" Andolf was then angry to hear that. It then rushed back to attack him. It again condensed the aura in its claws, and attacked him again using it. But it was then surprised when it saw Ian suddenly disappear in front of it, and Ian suddenly appeared behind it, and immediately delivered a powerful slash to its arm. Andolf screamed in pain after being hit by such a powerful attack, but Ian was surprised. He didn't expect that even the wind sword blade was not enough to cut its arm. He then saw Andolf who was about to attack him again. He then prepared another attack. A light suddenly shone from his sword, which then immediately cut off Andolf's arm. It screamed in pain when it was hit. Ian's attack did not stop there. He then used vacuum explosion. He will blow it up. And before Andolf could even react, his attack had already arrived, and cut off its other arm. Its blood splattered everywhere after receiving 2 fatal wounds, but Ian then felt annoyed that his sword was broken. It hadn't even been long since he left the village. Andolf could only look down while crawling in pain. But a purplish aura then suddenly enveloped it. Seeing that, Ian realized that it wanted to escape. Andolf's aura suddenly fluctuated. The sudden eruption of its aura was so powerful, Ian even had to hold it using the frost shield. Even so, he was still thrown back, and he then saw Andolf who was trying to escape. Andolf slightly glanced at him when it was about to escape. But Ian certainly wouldn't let it escape just like that. He then made an ice wall to block Andolf's escape route. The ice wall then shattered into several fragments which then rained down on Andolf who fell. And it could only resign himself to being buried in the ice and frozen. Ian then dropped his sword. He irritably asked, "Why did you bother to run away?" It had worried him at first glance. He thought he had lost it. He even went so far as to use frost prison to imprison it. He then absorbed and formed a vortex using the blood splattered on the ground and the flow of mana. The vortex then formed a ball of energy. Seeing that, Andolf then violently tried to break free, and once again tried to escape, but even though he had broken free from frost prison, it was useless. Because Ian was right above him with a very powerful energy ball beam in his hand, Andolf could only stare blankly as it watched the attack slowly approaching it, until it finally arrived, and caused a very powerful effect.